Good morning, everyone. I'm Kimberly Chalia with PHCA. Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar. A few quick updates to share before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the PHCA website. This webinar has been approved for one continuing education credit for all PHCA members in attendance. For those who provided a NAB number, credits will be uploaded within the next 2 to 3 weeks. As we begin today, please make sure that you are in listen-only mode. Please feel free to submit any questions that you might have using the chat icon at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure to answer as many of those questions as possible at the end of today's presentation. And now I'll turn it over to Gina.
Great. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining. We are going to be talking about building tomorrow's care team, recruitment, hiring, and management strategies for a multi-generational workforce. Very excited to be here. I am the Director of Workforce Solutions here at LeaderStat. I'm coming to you today from Columbus, Ohio. I am a licensed nursing home administrator, certified executive for assisted living here in Ohio, and a certified dementia practitioner. I started my career at a very young age in long-term care at the age of 21. I had my first administrator experience at the age of 23. That is going to come into play as we discuss multi-generational workforce today, because I am coming to you speaking from the perspective of a millennial, which can be very unique. We're going to have some good conversation about that today. I did spend 8 years or so in operations and skilled nursing centers and assisted livings. A lot of that time I did spend focusing on HR functions, recruitment, retention, hiring at a regional level. And currently in my role here at LeaderStat, I travel. I get to go see our clients and do recruitment and hiring consulting, where I actually go in and I assist communities to change some of their processes and procedures to make the candidate experience better and hopefully, get out of agency and start hiring and recruiting their own staff. So some objectives for today as we get started here. First and foremost, we're going to explore some of the current trends and challenges that are going on in long-term care staffing right now. We will then navigate some of the specific challenges that come with managing a multi-generational workforce and look at some of the strategies for fostering some collaboration among multi-generational teams. Then we'll look at some key elements that make a long-term care center attractive to the next generation of healthcare professionals. And then we'll also look at discussing some innovative approaches to recruitment and hiring that will lead to more sustainable staffing. So first, we're going to talk about the current staffing challenges and agency culture. I'm not going to spend too much time here because I assume I'm talking to some operators in the long-term care space, and you are all living and breathing these challenges every single day. So I don't need to sit here and tell you what those are, but I do want to put it into perspective before we get into some of the content today. So current outlook, long-term care centers, we know, were struggling long before COVID to hire and to retain staff. Really what the pandemic did was it just exacerbated a lot of the issues that we were already experiencing. At the time of the end of 2022, 87% of nursing homes were experiencing moderate or high staffing shortages. 98% of nursing homes were facing issues hiring new staff. 73% of nursing homes were having to face closure due to staffing shortages, not being able to take admissions. 60% of nursing homes were losing money. So 60% of nursing homes were running in the red, and 53% of nursing homes would not going to be able to operate at their current cost and current pace for more than a year. With those issues also came the issue of we have, for the first time ever, 5 generations working at the same time in the workforce. We have traditionalists, baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, Gen Y, and then Generation Z. So really what that means is we have to be dynamic leaders. In the days of one size fits all management are gone, right? Everybody, every generation, every person needs managed differently. So it is imperative to really understand the wants, the needs, and the values of every generation in order to not only manage them effectively, but to also get them attracted to wanting to work for your company, right? If we're still functioning on processes and procedures from 20 years ago, you might have some longevity and you might have some tenured staff, but I can guarantee you're struggling to hire new staff, right? So we have to start changing. We can't keep running on processes and procedures from 20 plus years ago that we relied on. Then on top of the current outlook and the multi-generational workforce, we also have agency culture. Agency usage in nursing homes pre-COVID, about 23% of centers were using agency. During COVID in 2022, 59% of centers reported using agency, and 11% of all direct care hours worked in the long-term care field were actually agency hours. And then you add into the financial implications of using agency, because agency staff is now 50 to 60% more expensive than hiring direct staff. And we'll look at some of those numbers here. I think this is a very interesting chart to show a lot of those differences in the wages and how we saw those increase. So the labor market dynamics associated with the pandemic had a significant impact on our labor costs in long-term care. So in 2018, just for direct employed nursing staff, we were averaging pay around $37, $27 for LPN, $16.10 for nurse aides. That increased in 2022 as we went through COVID. Now we were seeing RNs making around 45, LPNs making around almost 36, and nurse aides making around 22. So you can see the percent increases here. Then you talk about nursing homes that hired new staff, but were also utilizing agency. So nursing homes that used agency saw that their actual direct care wages for staff that they hired were also at a higher increase than nursing homes or long-term care facilities that were not using agency. And you can see those numbers here. And then you have the agency staff. So we all know what agencies did during COVID, right? We saw a almost 29% increase in RNs. So we're seeing RNs making in 2022 upwards of $69.38 for agency. LPNs, agencies were charging around $56.35, so an almost 34% increase from over the 4 years. And then nurse aides, we saw the largest increase. Nurse aides went up almost 40% from 2018 to 2022 of what the cost for an STNA would be through agency. So given that the hourly labor cost of using agency staff is higher than that of directly employing your staff, long-term care centers were hit twice, right? First, we were hit from overall wage increases because of the pandemic. And then second, the increased reliance on more expensive agency staff, which is how we got to see why 60% of nursing homes said that they were running in the red, that they were not making money during that time. And in order to, I tell people this all the time, in order to compete with agency, we have to understand why people want to work for agency. We have to understand that so that we can bring some of those benefits into our communities in order to compete with what agencies are offering. So we know agencies can obviously negotiate a higher wage for the staff when they work in different locations. So typically we saw agency staff earn at the caregiver level, they earn approximately 20% more than traditional staff. If they were just directly employed through a nursing home versus working for agency, they're making about 20% more on their dollar per hour. A flexible schedule can also help agency staff maintain a positive work-life balance and allow them to prioritize their personal life. They typically are able to decide how many hours per week they work, or they can sign into short-term contracts. So really an agency worker could work 3 months straight and then not work for an entire month if they didn't want to, right? And we do see them doing that a lot. And they also accrue a wide range of experiences. So your really good agency workers that do come through are typically not just doing it for the dollar per hour that they're making, but some of them do it because they feel like it's giving them that wide range of experience where they're having to go into different locations and just assimilate into these different processes and procedures and really understanding regulations. And so they feel like it's giving them more professional opportunity. So what does this all mean? And really, a lot of what we're going to talk about today is change. It's that buzzword that everybody's afraid of, change. We really have to start thinking outside the box as leaders in the senior living industry, because we can't keep doing things the way we've been doing them, right? We know that those are not going to work in the way our workforce has been changed. Our workforce has forever been changed since the pandemic. And now we really have to adjust and find some real solutions. And we have the looming federal staffing mandate as well, that we don't know what the changes are going to be, but we know there's going to be some type of change. And so this is really going to thrust us into this embodiment of change. And we really have to start thinking outside the box. And so some of the things that we're going to talk about today might be new topics, new ideas, but that's the point, right? The point is to discuss new things that we can be doing. So we're going to first start talking about the multi-generational workforce and some of the challenges that come with it. This is one of my favorite quotes by George Orwell about how we view generations. Each generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before it and wiser than the one that comes after it. Right? So millennials, we think we are smarter and way more intelligent than baby boomers, than Generation X, but we know that we are far wiser than the generation that comes after us, right? And every generation feels that way. Every generation has some sort of entitlement, right? That they are better than the one before it and wiser than the one that comes after. And the importance of understanding the multi-generational workforce in our industry is because every generation does truly bring unique traits and experiences to the workforce. And it's the job of you as the leader and as the management team to capitalize on the potential of every one of your employees. And that can start with just simply understanding their generation. Effectively managing a multi-generational workforce can set the tone and style of your employee interactions, job performance, productivity, and the overall culture in your building. So it's really time to start embracing the multi-generational workforce and looking at it as more of a benefit rather than a challenge. So I don't want to go into this chart, column by column. I would really like for you to all just be able to revisit this and take a look at it on your own time. But it really does go through some awesome characteristics, values that each generation is looking for. So you can see here we have traditionalists. Some of the typical traits of traditionalists are that they're dependable, they're hardworking, they're loyal team members. They went through the Great Depression, so they understand financial struggles. What are they valuing out of a company? What do they look for in a company? If a traditionalist is out looking for a job right now, they're looking for supplementing some of those retirement savings that they've made. And really, they might just be looking to stay active. They might have already retired and they're looking for that part-time job. I had a receptionist at my last nursing home that I was running that turned 83 at work. So those folks still exist out there and they are still looking for jobs. In-person interaction. So they're not comfortable with technology. They might not be comfortable with emails. They prefer that in-person interaction. They might be less inclined to incorporate technology into the workforce, right? Baby boomers, you can go through reading some of their characteristics, what they're looking for out of a company, kind of what their comfortability is with technology, and kind of some of the negative aspects of that generation's thought processes. That generation of baby boomers is 1946 to 1964. Then we have Gen X from 1965 to 1980. They can be seen as being more self-sufficient, that they're ambitious, they're eager to learn new skills, but they are really the first generation that we saw striving to have a healthy work-life balance. Millennials, 1981 to 1996. You can see there are some of the values, some of the characteristics of our generation. And then you can see Generation Z there, which is our youngest generation, 1997 and beyond. And we obviously can see some of their characteristics as well. So I highly encourage you to go back to this slide on your own time and just kind of take a look at some of these characteristics, because I think that they really do go along a lot with what we're going to talk about as we go through some of the managing strategies. So challenges, obviously with a 5 generations working potentially under one roof, there's going to be some challenges. Stereotypes and unconscious bias, we're going to touch on a little bit, communication, and then employee expectations and their priorities, which goes a lot into the hiring process. So stereotypes and unconscious bias. When employees really can't relate to someone due to the generational or age gap between them, they often resort to generalizations or negative misconceptions. And this really leads to that toxic culture where you see people blaming each other. You see poor performance, poor productivity, and again, ultimately that toxic company culture. When people make assumptions about somebody based on their generation, we cause employees to really feel judged before they even step into the office. A lot of those assumptions can honestly be made in the interview process, which can be a really bad interview technique, right? To assume somebody maybe doesn't know technology because of their generation. Or assuming a Gen Z walks into the office and they're automatically going to have that entitled, overly confident attitude, right? So making those preconceived stereotypes and notions during that interview process can even start the process off wrong before they even step foot into your building. And really it just falls in line of just that struggle of gaining respect from each other, right? Then we have communication. Communication is perhaps the greatest difference among workers from different generations. Arguably, the greatest challenge as a manager of a multi-generational workforce is knowing how to communicate and knowing how to communicate differently to each of your employees and to each of their generations. Every employee might have a different preference of communication style based on their generational experiences. And virtually all generations value clarity and conciseness in their communication, but their generation may influence the way that they process and respond to that information and really how they prefer to receive that information, right? So somebody that is a traditionalist might prefer to receive information just by a flyer or a posting at the time clock or a posting at their desk. They might not check their email every single day. They might not prefer to receive their information via the mass messaging on your scheduling app. They might not even have a smartphone, right? Whereas your Gen Z, your later generations prefer to receive communication through a text message. Don't call me, don't email me. I don't need the flyer at the work desk. Just text me, right? So different ways in how we want to receive communication as well. And then you have employee expectations and priorities. And this is super important in the hiring process, which we're going to talk about. We really need to understand how every generation prioritizes benefits, right? Because every generation will have a variety of expectations. And it can be really difficult to satisfy all of those expectations simultaneously. The most common difference is security and stability versus purpose and work-life balance. So we really find that millennials and Gen Z, they don't stay loyal to companies as much as maybe baby boomers or Gen X do. They're more inclined, and I can say we because I am functioning, I am on that millennial Gen Z cusp. I was born in 94, so I'm really on that cusp. We're more inclined to job hop because we are more inclined to job hop to find what we're looking for in a company. Versus a baby boomer, because a baby boomer values financial security. They value company loyalty. My mom, who is a baby boomer, born in 1959, she has been with her current company that she's going to retire from in next May for 45 years. That's unheard of for people at my age. Now, we obviously can't be at a company yet for 45 years. We're not old enough, but we look at that and we say, are you crazy? You've been showing up to the same desk, to the same company, to the same people for 45 years. That is unheard of for us. But my mom, whether she's being paid what she deserves to be or not, is loyal to her company because she values financial security and stability, right? And that's just not something that we value. My generation values work-life balance, and we value finding companies that share the same purpose as we do, right? So some effective management strategies. And then when we get into recruitment and hiring, key takeaways from today, that's where we're going to kind of connect the generational differences with that recruitment and hiring process. But first, I want to talk about just managing in general, some effective strategies. And we're going to go over each of these individually. So I'm going to kind of skip through this slide because we're going to go over each one of them. But establishing trust and respect. Having regular individual check-ins with employees while building that secure environment for sharing feelings and opinions, it's really offering psychological safety. Demonstrate active listening, encourage conversations about goals, employee satisfaction. It's really important to understand their employee satisfaction because employee satisfaction looks very different for everybody, and it looks different for different generations. Having one-on-one meetings really promotes the opportunity for that feedback. So gone are the days of 90-day check-ins and an annual review. We should be doing 30-day, 60-day, 6-month, and then annual check-ins for all of our employees. So when a new hire starts, we should be meeting with them at the 30-day check mark, the 60-day check mark. Obviously, if you have your mandatory 90-day eval to do, then we should be checking with them individually at the 6-month mark and then the year. This process has been proven to help retain employees, especially through their first 90 days, because we're having touch points with them every 30 days instead of after training and then 90 days later. A lot of times they're not making it through their 30 days. So we're not even getting to the 90 days to be checking in with them, right? And if we're only doing annual satisfaction surveys, you're missing a lot of feedback because we're not retaining everybody for a year. So you might be missing the feedback of people that were disgruntled at that quarterly mark, but you're not asking them. So you're not finding out until they've already left, right? So we really should be doing quarterly, all staff, company-wide employee satisfaction surveys on top of your individual supervisor check-ins with your employees. And then it's important to also know that some employees might not be outspoken due to the generation that they come from. They might be intimidated by the thought of those one-on-one meetings and expressing concerns to their supervisor. So there needs to be a variety of options. You know, millennials, Gen Z, we don't care to tell you how we feel, right? We are very blunt about how we feel. If you're not giving us what we want out of a company, right? But a baby boomer who values the financial stability and security might be a little wary to tell you how they're feeling in a one-on-one meeting. They might be more inclined to do that through an anonymous survey. So you have to make sure that you're giving options to collect that feedback. Creating mentorship initiatives. Pair employees from different generations on a project to have them collaborate with one another. When employees have the chance to share knowledge and work on a project together, it helps increase that intergenerational learning and bonding. Set collaborative goals, clear expectations. Employees might interpret direction differently. So make sure there are common goals and an identified purpose. That communication needs to be clear and concise, but it also needs to come in different forms to satisfy all of your generations. So when you're making an announcement about maybe an all staff meeting, hang a flyer at the time clock, hang a flyer at the nurses stations, also send it in an email, send it in a text or your mass messaging system, making sure you're offering everybody the ability to receive that information. Educate the leadership team. One of the biggest mistakes I see people do is, we sit on these webinars, we get all of this information, and then we don't go share it with our leadership teams, right? Help them understand the important advantages of working with multi-generations. Once they're able to see those benefits, they're going to be more inclined to gain meaningful insight from colleagues, and they're going to be able to show the team that you are willing to jump out of your comfort zone. And so they need to be doing that as well. So share this information with your entire leadership team that's managing your direct care staff. Providing meaningful employee benefits, and we'll get into this a little bit too in the second half of the presentation, but having a range of experiences, having a range of options. Some benefits are sought after by all generations, while others might just be important for different generations and certain generations. Consider conducting a staff benefits survey to find out what benefits really matter to your employees instead of just assuming. Career growth is actually reported as the #1 most important benefit for millennials and Gen Z. And that's going to be important as we talk about how to attract the next generation of workforce. Accommodating various work styles and preferences. Again, being a dynamic leader. We can no longer use the one-size-fits-all management style. Every individual employee will require a different style of coaching and mentoring. It's not solely because of their generation, but their generation definitely comes into play. And then we want to just be able to capitalize on every generation's skills and knowledge. Once we can understand the different values and different benefits that every generation brings to the workforce, that's when we can really help every generation thrive. Help your employees overcome the us versus them dynamic. A lot of times I will walk into a facility and they might be in a rural location where they might have employees that have been at that location for 25 years. Then they have this huge gap, and then they can't hire anybody and keep them over a year. So you have this tenured staff that has their ways and they're stuck in their ways and they've been there for all of these years. They're most likely baby boomers or Gen X. And then you have these millennials and Gen Z coming in that don't make it past 30 days, right? So we need to allow for generational differences. It's important for employees to understand why the organization places a high value on these issues being discussed and finding compromises. Reminding your team that the diversity of thought from different generations can really help increase the scale of new insights and really can allow organizations to make better, more educated decisions. Okay, so we talked about multi-generational workforce, and part of when we do these presentations, when I do this discussion live, is kind of the feedback that we get from everybody just kind of listening. It turns into a conversation about different stories, funny stories about different generations. So when we do it in a webinar, it's hard because we can't have that feedback, but hopefully as you were going through that, you were starting to think about how some of that kind of clicks with the workforce that you have in your individual communities. So taking what we just discussed, we are now going to take that a little bit further. So, you know, we study, you're going to go study that table. You're going to really look and you're going to understand those traits and those values of every generation. Now we take that understanding and we want to apply it to our recruitment, our hiring strategies, how we're doing scheduling in our communities, and then some staffing strategies that are now coming out of this new wave of staffing challenges that we're seeing, and how companies out there are coming up with creative ideas to overcome those challenges. So we're going to get into some specific kind of best practices is what I'll call them. And it's best practices of keeping up with this new generation entering the workforce. How do we attract them to our community? Okay. So here we kind of believe, and this is just kind of like our proven process. In order to create a successful staffing profile, you have to strategically manage all facets of the recruitment and hiring initiative. And you have to be able to look at current industry trends. You need to be able to be leveraging technology and electronic platforms. You have to have adequate training, and you really need to have a positive candidate experience. From the moment somebody sees your job posting online to their first 30, 60, 90 days as an actual employee, you need to make sure that experience is positive. And we're going to talk about that. So successful staffing profile leads to staff retention, which leads to sustainable operations. And if we look at that backwards, We all want to talk about quality. We all want to talk about quality care and being sustainable. How can we get to being sustainable and offering quality care if we don't have staff? So everybody's focus should be on recruitment and hiring and retention, because you can't get to quality without it, right? So talking about some best practices with recruitment and hiring. Social media management. Everybody hears about social media. Social media is everything right now. Truly, aside from word of mouth, social media is the second best recruitment tactic. So what should we be doing on our social media to attract the next generation? Posting more about culture. I go on a lot of companies' social media pages when I'm in doing my consulting engagements, and I look at their social media, and all I see is resident activities, what we're doing for our residents, and that's great. But you have to remember that your residents' families are not the only ones using social media, right? Your future employees are also on social media. So now, rule of thumb, and you should write this down, rule of thumb, 1 in every 5 social media posts should be about what it's like to work at the center, employee appreciation. What do you do to recognize your employees? Retention activities, right? Did you do some type of employee workshop? Highlight that. Employee growth. Do you have an employee that went from being maybe a housekeeping aide to now being your housekeeping supervisor, or an STNA that has now worked their way up and is now an LPN manager, right? Highlight that. We need to start seeing things about what it's like to work at your center or your community on your social media pages. So 20%, or 1 in every 5 posts. Now, you want to be careful. You don't want to put out there, we are hiring, right? Because we don't want our resident families to see, oh, they must be struggling with staffing, right? They're posting all of these, we're hiring. You don't want to call attention to that, but you want to strategically post about culture, how fun it is to work at your company, what your employees say about working for the company, things like that. So really leveraging social media. Job posts and really the candidate experience as they're applying for your jobs. Really taking a look at, how does your job post set apart from the competition? We know that in most, especially urban areas, you might be competing with 20 to 25 other communities in a very small mileage radius, right? If everybody's looking for workers, and I'm not talking just even senior living communities at this point, we're talking Target, Chick-fil-A, any type of fast food restaurant, Walmart, we're competing with everybody now, right? How do your job posts set you apart from all of this competition that we're seeing, right? What is going to make somebody look at your job post versus looking at the rest of the 35 that are posted, right? So we need to make sure we're utilizing catchy taglines, eye-catching job titles, highlight a benefit that differentiates you. If you offer same-day pay, put that in your job title, right? In your title on Indeed, put STNA, daily pay offered, newly increased shift differential, come work at some, come give back to those in need, like something that is going to make them look at your job title, not just STNA first shift. That's boring. Everybody puts that. Something that makes you stand apart. Also within your job posts, include links to your social media, brand your job posts. Next thing is to make sure that the candidate can apply quickly. Rule of thumb, 3 clicks or less. So if you post your jobs on Indeed, you know that there's typically a quick apply option where they can click quick apply, apply with resume, submit. And that's it. 3 clicks or less. If you are still requiring your job applicants to fill out a complete application with references and everything, you are not getting the maximum amount of applicants you can get. That is truly something that turns away applicants anymore, because so many people offer a quick 2-second application offer, right? Option. So if you are not doing that, then you are falling behind and you are not capturing the maximum amount of applicants you can get. Because if they're going to your website and they have to fill out all of that information, they're going back to Indeed to look at a quick apply option. Also important to know, 80% of job candidates apply from their phone. 80% of people that are applying for jobs report that they do it from their phone. So I would challenge you at the end of this webinar to go on your smartphone, pull up your application and see, does your application read well from a smartphone? The amount of times I've pulled up a client's application and I can't read it on the screen, you can't complete the application, it's not phone friendly, that's driving people away. Because if they're applying from their phone and they can't apply from their phone cleanly for your job, then they're being turned away. They're not going to complete the application, right? Then we need to look at contact. How long does it take to initiate contact with applicants? 24 hours or less is the rule of thumb. If you are not contacting your job applicants in 24 hours or less, somebody else is. I promise you. And I'm not talking about the generic response that it's an automated response from your company where it says no reply, do not reply to this message, right? That's cold, right? Everybody gets that. I'm talking about somebody physically either picking up the phone and calling them, emailing them, or texting, and we're going to get to that. How long does it take? You should have somebody covering weekend hours if people are applying on the weekend. You know, most job applicants come through on the weekend and then they start their work on Monday and they forget they've even applied to your job, right? Maybe they're sitting on night shift at 2 a.m., disgruntled at their current job, applying for jobs, right? If we're not contacting them within 24 hours, you are losing them. Okay, so you need to have weekend hour coverage. Maybe your weekend manager on duty can cover applications coming through. Maybe you have a night shift supervisor. I'm telling you, one of the positions I was struggling with the most in one of my communities was night shift. I had 11 open positions on night shift. I had a night shift supervisor, and I realized my HR was contacting these night shift applicants that are applying at 1 and 2 a.m. at 8 a.m. Well, they're sleeping. They just got off work. And then by the time they wake up, they're heading into work, right? So I started having my HR leave applications and phone numbers out for my night shift supervisor of people that apply overnight. And then my night shift supervisor would come in and she would text them at night on their shift while they're most likely up working. And we hired 11 night shift workers within 2 weeks. Just from doing that. I'm not saying that that has to be something that needs to be done every day, but if you're specifically struggling on a certain shift, I would heavily look at the inquiry management piece of it. How quickly are we getting to our applicants? Are we only trying to contact them one time? Or are we attempting to contact them at least 3 different times, 3 different days, 3 different times of the day? And is that contact via text? Texting is the holy grail of recruitment these days. Everybody wants to be texted. This new wave, again, we're talking about attracting the next generation of healthcare workers. They want to receive messages via text. Hey, saw you apply for this position. Would love to have you come in for an interview. What does your schedule look like? Text them. A lot of companies are looking into apps that go right on your laptop, texting applications. So it's a phone number connected to your company. It's not your recruiter using their personal cell phones. It's an application that you can install onto your computer that can connect to your applicant tracking system. And every time somebody applies, their phone number and name is automatically created as a contact in this texting application. They can just go straight in there and text them from their computer. It goes to these applicants right to their to their cell phones like a text message. It's the easiest way to communicate. Speaking of technology, electronic applicant tracking systems. If you are not using an electronic applicant tracking system for onboarding and handling the influx of applications coming in, you are way, way behind. Okay. And then I don't want to just pass over days to hire. Hopefully most of you know this by now, but how quick is your hiring process? If your hiring process takes more than 7 days, you are losing your candidates, because even though they might have accepted a position at your community, if they need a job now, most of them have already quit their job. There hardly is any more 2-week notices being given, right? I'm sure you all are dealing with that struggle right now. Most of my generation and younger, we don't give notices. If you do something to upset us, they know that everybody needs them right now. And they know that if they walk out of your building today, they could have a job tomorrow with another community, right? So if you're one of those communities that is getting these people into your door, and then you're giving them a hiring process that takes 2 weeks to get them into orientation, I guarantee somebody is doing it quicker than you. And that's why you're getting ghosting at your orientations. So you're getting people that either you get an interview scheduled and they don't show up because maybe you couldn't do the interview for 3 days, but another company could do the interview tomorrow over FaceTime or Zoom, right? You're missing them there. And then if your hiring process is taking 14 days, somebody else is probably getting them in a lot quicker. Right. And so now you're getting people that have accepted a position with you, but because of the runaround they have to go through in order to get a job and come in for orientation, now you've got somebody that just doesn't show up, and they probably are already hired, have had orientation, or are in training in another community. Okay. So days to hire should be 7 days or less. We should be holding orientations every single week. And we'll talk about orientation as well, but there should be no reason why hiring should be taking more than 7 days. A lot of people still have their candidates and new hires have to go to, they get hired and then they have to drive to a background check. Then they have to drive somewhere separate to go get their fingerprints. And then they have to drive somewhere separate to go get a drug test done. And you might be talking to somebody that's a single mom or dad, maybe doesn't have reliable transportation, maybe doesn't have the time in their day to go 3 different places and the gas money to drive that. And if we're requiring that of some of our staff, again, that also might be something as to why you might be getting people ghosting you at orientation. Moving on to interviewing. Interviewing has now become probably the most important aspect of the hiring process. Has your staff that conducts interviews had any type of formal interview training? Most people say no to that, which is scary, right? Because we are living in a very sensitive culture. And if they don't know legally what they can and cannot ask in an interview, that can get you in a lot of trouble, right? But not only that, they need to know how to sell your building, because you are now being interviewed just as much, if not more, as the person you are interviewing. Right? They're interviewing you because they might have 7 interviews today, and they might know that every community in the area is hiring. So now it's your job to tell them why they should work for you versus the community down the street. How do you sell your building? So it's essentially doing sales training with your management team that is interviewing candidates on the job, right? Then you have orientation and training. A lot of people don't invest in this as much as they should. Orientation, gone are the days where orientation is coming in and signing 200 signatures in a large packet of paperwork and going over what you can and can't do policy-wise, right? Orientation should now be interactive. Every department head should have a part and come and introduce themselves in orientation. And it should really be an entire day. It should be a celebration, right? It's orientation. It's your first day on the job. It should be a celebration. You should by now hopefully have incorporated onboarding electronically so that they can just electronically sign all of these documents that they need to sign. Most of the time, that's something that can be done before they come in to sit in orientation, so that orientation can be focused on why we are such a great company to work for, what makes us different from the rest of the companies you've already worked for in the past. And then, do you have a structured employee mentor program? A lot of people talk about not being able to retain employees through their 30, 60, 90 days. A lot of this comes back to their training experiences. If you don't have a mentor program, then who is training your new employees and what is their incentive to do a good job, right? With mentor programs, a lot of times they're getting an increased wage. They are seen as leaders. We let them wear special pins that indicate that they are a mentor. I used to hold an employee mentor program banquet. So I would have all of my mentors come into this annual banquet where they could bring their families, and we would do a huge celebration for them, because really your mentors are the reason you have staff retention. They are the ones that are being held accountable, and they have responsibility to see your new hires through their first 90 days and to make sure that they stay. And that's an incentive for them. They get more money. Maybe they get a bonus if their mentees stay past their 90 days. Something to make them want to train. You know, we get into this structure, we get into this issue where it's like, listen, you have to help me help you. I can bring in employees, but if you're running them off, you can complain all you want about being short-staffed, but what else can I do except get them in the door? You need to keep them. I need you guys to also have some type of responsibility and skin in the game to want to help this building become staffed, so you don't have to work short-staffed, right? Scheduling. People don't talk about scheduling enough. I hate that I even have to breeze through these next couple slides, because I can do an entire presentation about best scheduling practices, but I'm giving you like the most basic of information that I can to make this go a little bit quicker, because I know I have about 15 minutes left. So schedulers now, if you think about it, right, labor expenses of our operational budget, labor expenses are about 40, and that probably has increased now to about 40 to 45% of all of our operational expenses in long-term care is labor. And schedulers are literally responsible for your labor budget, right? They are the ones responsible for making sure that you are staying within your labor budget every day. Schedulers don't often have the authority of a supervisor. However, a lot of the time, your frontline care staff look at the scheduler as a supervisor, because they control how many hours they get. They control whether or not they get their requested days off, and those both directly control their paycheck and their personal life. So they're not seen as a supervisor, but they are directly controlling your employees' work-life balance and their paychecks and the hours that they're getting. And then with the severe staffing shortage, schedulers are often finding themselves being pulled to the floor to perform clinical duties rather than being able to focus on scheduling duties. Schedulers can literally make or break your retention and turnover now more than ever, especially when we bring in agency culture. Because agency culture, that the one thing that agency workers truly work for agency for is that work-life balance. So the schedule. So now we have to look at our schedulers and say, we need you to help us compete with this agency culture, right? Now, we talked about all of this responsibility that our schedulers have. Now let's look at what our most common hiring strategies are for schedulers. An employee that's on light duty. So we don't even know that they're qualified to be a scheduler, but we know that they're on light duty. And so that's the easiest thing to give them is scheduling. It used to be, right? It used to be. An employee that might be friends with the direct care staff. So you might be looking and saying, who could we put in scheduling now? Well, this person gets along with everybody. I'm sure they'd be well respected in the position. So let's put them in the scheduling position. Adding the responsibility to an already overworked clinical manager. The amount of times I've seen an ATON or a unit manager responsible for scheduling it's really scary, right? Because a clinical manager duty has its own full-time job. And then you add in a scheduler, which is its own full-time job, right? Combining the role with another position. In one of my previous facilities, my scheduler was also central supply and was also medical records. And then maybe an employee with a clinical certification. So what are some things we can do to be better in the scheduling realm? Some best practices for our schedulers. One is sufficient training. We need to set our schedulers up for success. You have to have some type of investment for training in this role. It is not enough to just say, okay, you're on light duty, you can do scheduling, here's the Excel spreadsheet, good luck, right? And so many people do that. I'm guilty of doing that, right? But But schedulers, the role that they play now, we can't do that. We have to start investing in it. And putting the right person in the role is important. You looked at all of the things that schedulers are responsible for. So now you have to look at what are the traits and the skills necessary to have in order to be a scheduler. And now we have to start hiring for that role based on those traits and those skills that they need to have, not just because they're friends with the staff, not just because they're on light duty. Posting the schedule in advance. If you're not posting the schedule 4 to 6 weeks in advance, you're doing it wrong. It used to be able to get away with 2 weeks in advance, but not anymore because of the work-life balance that this next generation is looking for. They look for their schedule to be posted 4 to 6 weeks in advance so they can plan their life. Building an on-call schedule. This is one of the things I did at my last facility I was at before I jumped out of day-to-day operations. But I used to have an on-call schedule, not just with nurses or my nurse management team. I had an on-call schedule for STNAs too. So maybe it was a pool of staff on the weekends that they said, hey, you know, I could take on-call this weekend. I don't have anything going on. They get paid an extra amount per hour if they do get called into work, but they know that the chance is there that they might get called in if there's a call off, right? It doesn't just fall on your nurse management team. Providing flexible schedule operation or flexible staffing options. Nurses and caregivers really watch the rest of the world benefit from some of the fundamental changes that really improved work life as we knew it before COVID, right? You see a lot of people transitioning to remote work, hybrid roles, etc. We need some fresh ideas in our industry so that our staff can benefit from some of those societal changes that have been available to other people. So providing flexible staffing options. This could be as easy as providing flexible start times to your shifts. You might have a 7 a.m. to 3:30 shift. You might then see that there's a group of people that have to drop their kids off at daycare that doesn't open until 7. So they can't get to work till 7:30. So you might have a 7:30 to 4. And then you might have those people that have to get their kids on the school bus and can't get to work till 8. Well, then maybe you have an 8 to 4:30 shift that people are on. You have to start offering those options. I know that sounds scary. I know that sounds confusing, but it's offering those options that get people to come to work for you. And instead of saying, well, the shift is 7 to 3:30, and they say, well, I really can't get here until like 7:20 because I have to drop my kid off at daycare. It doesn't open until 7. And you say, well, it is what it is. That's our schedule. And we used to be able to say that. We can't do that anymore. That does not work for this next level of this next generation. And then investing in a scheduling software. Can't stress this enough. If you don't have a scheduling software, you are way, way, way behind. It streamlines the process of creating schedules. It streamlines the process of communicating those changes to your schedule. It reduces the administrative work on your scheduler, and maybe it becomes more feasible to have a position that is combined. It makes sure that staff have that instant access to their schedule from their phone. Phones are like crack, right? It's literally like crack to the next generation. They have everything they could ever want with instant results from their phone, right? That's what we need to offer them too. And that's something that agency offers them, right? So we need to be competing with that. The last 8 minutes here, I just want to take some time to talk about 2 staffing strategies that we've been seeing communities and companies starting to move to. Managed service provider program, so an MSP. This is something that you might have already started to hear about. If you haven't, this is a new wave of a strategy for staffing agency that has been coming into play. So we know as the mandated staffing rule, it comes in, you know, a lot of communities are going to be leaning on agency again. And so what an MSP does is you basically contract with a third-party provider to become that it becomes their primary responsibility to manage your contingent workforce, your agency. So really it becomes like a one-stop shop for all of your agency needs. So I'm going to kind of skip a slide and then come back to that slide because I think it'll be easier to explain this with a visual. So here in the middle, you have your MSP provider. Okay, that's your managed service provider. And this could be a company. So LeaderStat, we offer an MSP program. So there's many companies out there that offer us. So that company goes in the middle there, and that becomes your buffer between you as the client and the agencies. VMS here is just a vendor management system. That's just the technology. So it's the software platform. So what happens is, let's say your community uses 4 to 5 different agencies, or maybe you're on this call and you're a regional for a company and you have 8 buildings, and each of those 8 buildings uses 4 different agencies. So now you're using upwards of 30 some different agencies. You have different contracts with all these agencies. You have different invoices that come in every week. You can't keep track of all of this agency usage that's happening across your company in one day. So what this does is it removes all of those contracts that you have with third-party agencies. And what it does is you contract with your vendor manager, your MSP program, and then your MSP program holds all partner contracts with agencies. So we have about 20 agencies in our MSP right now that work on our client jobs. Some other MSPs probably have hundreds of agencies that are working on their clients' jobs. And so what happens is, if your scheduler needs to put a need in for a shift, they log into this software, their MSP software. They log in, they put the shift order in one time. And in that one time, they publish their shift order, and that order is now open for all of these agencies that are in the MSP to work on. Agencies go in, they go ahead and make their candidate submissions into that vendor management software. And then you as the client go in, you get a notification, hey, agency so-and-so submitted a candidate for your shift. Please go in and approve or deny. And then you get to go in and you get to approve or deny that person. So what it's doing is, instead of your scheduler having to contact 3 or 4 different agencies to have to get a shift out there, they get to go into this system and they put it in one time, and in a second, many different agencies are working on that job. And then when you get your invoice, you only get one invoice. So whether you use 5 agencies or 10 agencies in 1 week, you're only getting one invoice with all of that agency use on it. And then on top of that, you at any point in time can log into your software and see anything you want. How many hours of agency do we have today? How many hours of agency do we have projected and confirmed over the week, over the next month? How much have we spent in agency today? How much have we spent this week? How much have we spent over the month, over the year? It pops out PBJ reporting. Everything that you could need with your contingent workforce is managed in this vendor management software and is managed by a team of that's your MSP. So no more communication with agencies, no more having to put out different emails and messages and all these different ways agencies like to receive job orders. One time you get to do that. So it's a one-stop shop. And so you get to receive these benefits. Best thing about it is it's no cost to the community. It's paid for by the agencies. So you pay that invoice to your MSP provider. The MSP provider then divvies up the payment accordingly to the agencies. So you're only even paying the MSP. The MSP takes care of paying the agencies. And what this really does, and I love this as an administrator who had to use agency, I saw what agencies did during COVID to pricing. It puts the power back in your hands, because agencies really didn't have to work for your business, right? During COVID, business just came to them because we all needed their help. Now what it does is it makes agencies compete for your business, because if an agency is not serving you well as our client, as an MSP client of any other company, they're going to shut off access to your jobs. And so that company, that agency now has to start saying, okay, we need to do better, or we're going to start losing business because they're not going to let us see this client's jobs because we've continuously provided them with poor service. So it's putting the power back in your hands to force agencies to compete for your business, which I love, right? Then we also have been seeing recruitment process outsourcing. This is a pretty easy concept to understand. If you don't have a heavy corporate support system, maybe your company is a little smaller, you don't have that corporate support team at the top, your HR workers are still doing recruiting from the building. It's really difficult nowadays for recruiters at the building to actually recruit. They are literally, most of them, with the amount of work they're keeping up on in the building, they're doing more of the post and pray. right? Post and pray. They're not actually out there sourcing or recruiting. So now what we're seeing is companies start to outsource this. So they're hiring companies that specialize in recruitment, that do it every single day, to be their recruitment process outsourcing. So a lot of times what this means is they have a company that is posting their jobs for them, handling recruitment, going to job fairs, handling the intake process, making sure that the applicants are getting responses within 24 hours. They are doing the candidate screening. They might be doing the interview process and onboarding, or they could be following more of a hybrid model where they do all of the intake and then they schedule the interviews for you, and then you do the interviews and take over the hiring process from there. So the hybrid model is the most popular model. We've also been seeing project RPOs. We just got a request for a project RPO where a company was really struggling with dietary and housekeeping. And so for 3 months, we have now become their RPO, where we are going to really focus for 3 months just on bringing in dietary and housekeeping, recruiting, sourcing, screening, scheduling those interviews, and getting them in the door. So we're seeing a lot of companies turn to that model as well. So in conclusion, effectively managing a multi-generational workforce is really requires a strategic and inclusive approach that really leverages the strengths that each generation brings to the workforce. Fostering that open communication, embracing flexibility and leadership, and implementing a lot of those other strategies we talked about, discussed, are essential components of a successful multi-generational culture. And then if you combine that culture with a well-developed recruitment and hiring process based on those recommendations that this new generation of workforce is looking for, this will lead to sufficient staffing, which leads to sustainable operations. It's really impossible to have quality care without staff. So you need to focus on your workforce. Here is my contact information. I'm at 12 o'clock on the dot, which I'm pretty proud of, and I got through all my slides because I could talk about this for 2 hours at least. But here's my information, my email, my phone number. You can scan that QR code. It'll connect you directly with my LinkedIn. I'm always posting different ideas on my LinkedIn and different things. So please, if you enjoyed this, connect with me on there, and I will go ahead and turn it back over to Kim to close out.
Thank you so much, Gina. This was some great information today. And I did remind everyone, if you have any questions, to submit those in the chat. I did not see any that come through. But as always, please feel free to email myself or Gina and we can assist. And John, I see your note that you wanted a copy of the slide deck. Gina, if you share that with me, I can send that to attendees with their certificates.
Perfect. I would love that. Yep, I will send them over to you.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thanks so much, Gina.
Of course. Thank you, everybody.